Hi students, myself Kartika. Hope all are doing good. Today we are going to see an interesting lecture. Can you understand what I am talking about? Definitely is, isn't it? Because the language that I am talking is understandable by most of you. Can I make the computers understand what I am talking about? Definitely no, because the computers, the machines, can understand only binary language. Binary language is nothing but it can understand only zeros and ones. Whatever we are talking is high-level language for the computers. If you don't know any particular language, we use Google translators to translate that language to an understandable form. Similarly, computers need any translators to convert the high-level language to a language understandable by them. This is done by language interpreters. So today we are going to see about the language interpreters, that is the software that helps the computers to translate the high-level language to the understandable form. So the general objective is, today we are going to understand the working of language processing system along with two parts of compilation process, and these are the specific objectives. First, language interpreters. The language interpreters are of three types. First, compilers, interpreters and assemblers. As told before, the language interpreters are nothing but it is a software used to translate the program written in high-level language to machine understandable form. So this is called as language interpreters. Now let us see the three types of interpreters: compilers, interpreters and assemblers in detail. Compiler. Compiler is a program, that is, it is a system software. So compiler translates an executable program in one language, nothing but our high-level language, into an executable program in another language, that is nothing but a machine understandable language. So this is the block diagram explaining the working of a compiler. If a source code is nothing but a code that is written in C or C++, any high-level language program. If it is fed into the compiler what it will do means, it will compile it and it produces the target code. The target code is nothing but the binary code or machine code that is understandable by the computer. While this translation, the compilers will produce errors. These errors have to be corrected by the programmers manually. So during the conversion, compiler will produce errors if there is an error in the program. Next, interpreter. Interpreter also does the same thing what a compiler do. What interpreter will do means, it also convert the high-level language into machine understandable language, whereas an interpreter will do it line by line. Okay. So the translation of single statement of a source program into machine code is done by our interpreter, and this interpreter will execute the program immediately before moving to the next line. So this is important. So before moving to the next line, it tries to convert the program. So the block diagram of interpreter is given here. Similarly, when a source code is provided, the interpreter, it converts the high-level language program into a machine understandable program. Assemblers. Assembler is also a type of language processing system. The source program is an input for the assembler, and the assembler takes that input and it produces the output. The output of the assembler is nothing but the machine code or object code that is understandable by the computer. So this is the block diagram of an assembler. So the assembler takes the assembly language program as an input and it provides the object code or machine code as the output. So these are the three types of language interpreters used in common: compilers, interpreters and assemblers. Compilers and interpreters do the same thing. It takes a high-level language program. High-level language program is nothing but the program that we are using, we are writing. C program, C++ program, Python program, or whatever program that is written in English, that is called as a high-level language program. So that high-level language program is taken as an input by the compilers and interpreters, and it will produce as what? It will produce as a machine code, that is computer understandable code, as an output. Whereas assembler will take the assembly language code as an input. Assembly language code is somewhat different from the high-level language code that we are using. It takes the assembly language code as an input and produces a machine code, that is a computer understandable code, as an output. Now let us see the difference between compilers and interpreters, because both compilers and interpreters are doing the same job. They are taking high-level language and converting into an binary code. Then why we need two converters? Let us see the difference between compilers and interpreters. Compilers. What compilers will do means, compilers will scan the entire program and translates the whole of it into a machine language code. Whereas interpreter, it translates just one statement of the program at a time into machine code. So compiler translates as a whole, whereas interpreter translates line by line. Next, compiler. Compiler takes a lot of time to analyze the source code, whereas interpreter will take very less time to analyze the source code. Since compiler takes lot of time to analyze the source code, the overall execution time is less, whereas the interpreter takes very less time to analyze the source code, but the overall execution time is more. Compiler, while compiling, it generates the intermediate code. Since it generates an intermediate code, it will need some linking process. That intermediate code has to be linked. Hence, more memory is required for compilers, whereas interpreter does not generate an intermediate code. Hence, interpreter is highly efficient in terms of memory. Compiler generates the error message only after it scans the complete program, and hence debugging is harder. Whereas interpreters keeps translating the program continuously till the first error is confronted. If any error is spotted, it stops working, and hence debugging becomes easy in case of interpreters. The compilers used by the programming languages are C and C++, whereas interpreters are used by programming languages like Python and Ruby. So these are the major differences between compilers and interpreters. So as a summary, compiler will translate the program as a whole, whereas interpreters will translate line by line. While checking line by line, if an error is encountered, it stops the execution process, and once the error is refined, then again it starts the translation process. So that is the major difference between compilers and interpreters. Next, language processing system. So before going into the language processing system, let us first understand how a program. For example, let us see that we are using a C compiler. Okay, we are using a C compiler and we are executing it on a host machine. So what we will do? We will first write the program in C language. Then C compiler compiles the program and translates it to assembly program. Assembly program is a low-level language program. Then what an assembler will do means, assembler will then translate this assembly code. Assembler will then translate the assembly code into machine code. So during this translation, we will use linker and loader tool. So what linker will do means, linker tool is used to link all the parts of the program together for execution. For example, if you are having many modules in our program, means if you are writing a program with lot of functions, each and every function will be executed separately. And while executing the program as a whole, these functions has to be linked together. So that is the work done by the linker. Linker helps to combine all the executable parts of a program. Then what is the use of loader? After linking, it has to be loaded into the memory to make it ready for execution. So that work is done by loader. Loader helps to load all these linked files into memory. Now this program gets ready for execution. So this is the general steps that is involved before executing a C program. We will type a C program in our compiler, in our console we will type. What is done in the background is, this is the steps that is done in the background. So the series of steps I explained here is illustrated in this diagram. First, preprocessors. So the first step after writing a source program, the first work is done by preprocessors. See, in our high level language, if a program contains hash define or hash include, we will write programs. No. In C program, we will have hash include stdio.h, hash include conio.h. If we are defining something, we will use some macros. No. Hash define pi as 3 point something, we will define. So usually in a high level language program, we include all this. We will have hash define statements, hash include statements. So these are closer to humans. We know what it means. Whereas it is far away from machines. These hashtags are called preprocessor directives. They direct the preprocessor about what to do. Now what this preprocessor do means, the preprocessor remove all the hash include directives by including the files called file inclusion and all the hash defined directives using macro expansion. It performs file inclusion, augmentation, macro processing and lots of work. After doing all the pre-processing steps, the pre-processed code is given to the compiler. So compiler or interpreter, we can use anything. So what these compiler and interpreter will do? An interpreter will convert the high level language into low level machine language, just like a compiler, but they are different in the way they read the input. The compiler in one go reads the inputs, does the pre-processing and executes the source code, whereas the interpreter does the same line by line. Compiler scans the entire program and translates it as a whole into machine code, whereas an interpreter translates the program one statement at a time. Interpreter programs are usually slower with respect to compiled ones. Now assembler, for every platform, hardware and OS, we have an assembler. They are not universal since for each platform we have one. The output of a assembler is object file or relocatable machine code. So what it do means, it translates the assembly code into the machine code. Now what is mean by relocatable machine code? Relocatable machine code is nothing but it can be loaded at any point and can be run. The address within the program will be in such a way that it will cooperate for the program movement. Next, loader and linker. Loader and linker will convert this relocatable machine code into absolute machine code. Absolute machine code is nothing but the computer understandable code. So it converts the relocatable code into absolute code and tries to run the program, resulting in a running program or an error message. Linker loads a variety of object files into a single file to make it executable. Then loader loads it in memory and execute it. So these are the various steps involved in a language processing system. Now let us discuss about the other types of compiler. So the first type is cross compiler. So cross compiler runs on a machine A and produces a code for another machine B. It is capable of creating code for a platform other than the one on which the compiler is running. So that is cross compiler. Next, source to source compiler. So this is otherwise called as transcompiler or transpiler. This is a compiler that translates the source code written in one programming language into a source code of another programming language. So these are the two types of compilers. Next, structure of a compiler. The compiler is usually divided into two phases, analysis phase and synthesis phase. Let us discuss analysis phase and synthesis phase in detail. Analysis phase. Analysis phase is known as the front end of the compiler. The analysis phase of the compiler, it reads the source program, divides it into core parts and then checks for lexical errors, grammar errors and syntax errors. So the analysis phase generates an intermediate code representation of the source program, and it also generates symbol table. So these two, intermediate representation of the source program and symbol table, has to be provided as an input to our next phase, synthesis phase. Synthesis phase is known as back end of the compiler. The synthesis phase generates the target program with the help of intermediate source code representation and symbol table that is generated as an output from the analysis phase. This is the block diagram representing the structure of the compiler. So the front end is analysis part and the back end is synthesis part. So the analysis part takes the source code and it will produce as intermediate code as an output. Along with that, it produces symbol table also. So these both are given to the synthesis part, and this synthesis part produces machine code as the output. The other tools that use the analysis and synthesis model are editors, pretty printers, static checkers, interpreters, text formatters, silicon compilers, query interpreters or compilers. Let us discuss about these tools in detail in later lectures. Phases. A compiler can have many phases and passes. First, we need to know what is meant by a pass. A pass refers to the traversal of a compiler through the entire program. Then what is phase? Phase of a compiler is a distinguishable stage. So this distinguishable stage takes input from the previous stage, processes and yields output that can be used as input for the next stage. A pass can have more than one phase. Now let us see the 6 phases of a compiler. Compiler definition is nothing but it translates the high level language into a machine language. But the work of the compiler is not done in a single step. lot of steps are involved in this compilation process. So that compilation process is categorized into 6 phases like lexical analysis, syntax analysis, semantic analysis, intermediate code generation, code optimization, and finally code generation. All of the aforementioned phases involve the following tasks, that is symbol table management and error handling. First, let us see what is meant by lexical analysis. Lexical analysis is the first phase of the compiler, which is also known as scanning. So, source program is scanned to read the stream of characters, and those characters are grouped to form a sequence called lexemes. That lexemes produces tokens as output. Syntax analysis. Syntax analysis is the second phase of a compiler, and this is also called as parsing. So, parser converts these tokens that is produced by the lexical analyzer into a tree-like representation called syntax tree or parse tree. Then semantic analysis. This is the third phase of a compiler, and this checks for semantic consistency. Type information is gathered and stored in symbol table or in a syntax tree. So, the main work of semantic analyzer is type checking. The output is parse tree. Intermediate code generation produces intermediate representation for the source program. The intermediate representations are of the following forms like postfix notations, 3 address code, and syntax tree. So, the output of an intermediate code generator is an intermediate code. Code optimization. Code optimization gets the intermediate code as an input and produces the optimized code as an output. Why we need optimized code means for making the machine running faster, we need optimized code. This optimized code is done by reducing the number of lines of code for a program. This phase reduces the redundant code and attempts to improve the intermediate code so that faster running machine code will result. During the code optimization, the output, that is the result of the program, is not affected. To improve this optimization, lot of optimization techniques are used like removing the dead codes, calculation of constants in expression and terms, collapsing of repeated expression into temporary string, loop unrolling, moving code outside the loop, removal of unwanted temporary variables. So, these are some of the methods involved in code optimization. So, the optimized code is finally given to the last phase, code generator. Here, the optimized code is taken as an input and that input is mapped to the respective target code. The code generator translates the intermediate code into a sequence of relocatable machine codes. Sequence of instructions of machine code performs the task as the intermediate code would do. Symbol table management. Symbol table is used to store all the information about identifiers used in the program. It is like a data structure containing a record for each identifier with fields for the attributes of the identifier. It allows finding the record for each identifier quickly and to store or retrieve data from that record. Whenever an identifier is detected in any of the phases, it is stored in the symbol table. For example, let us take int a, b, float c, char, is it. So these are the identifiers used in a program. Now how a symbol table is created for this identifier means, first it is like a data structure. First symbol name will be provided. So what is the symbol name? The first statement, A is the symbol name. Next, what is its type? What is its data type? Integer, int. Let us assume that this symbol, this identifier A, is stored in the address 1000. So this address depends upon the address space that is available in the memory. As for an example, I am mentioning it as 1000. Then next identifier is B. An entry is created with its type integer. Since integer will occupy 2 bytes, I am storing B in 1002 address. Next identifier is C. What is its type? Float. And C is stored at the address 1004. Next identifier is Z. What is its type? Char. And the address stored is 1008 since float occupies 4 bytes. So this is how a symbol table is created for the identifiers in the program. So when an identifier is encountered in a program, an entry is marked in the symbol table with its type and the address where that particular identifier is located in the memory. So this is with symbol table management. So this symbol table is added or deleted in all the phases of the compiler. Next, error handling. Each phase will have some errors. After detecting an error, for example, if an error occurs in lexical phase is responsible for handling this error. Before generating an output, the lexical phase should handle the errors and this error has to be removed. Then only this particular phase will produce as the output. So each phase can encounter the errors. After detecting the error, the phase should handle the error so that compilation can proceed. These are the 6 phases of a compiler. In all the 6 phases, symbol table management and error handling is done. Let us see about the 6 phases of a compiler in detail with an example in the next lecture. I hope you understand what is meant by a compiler and what does the compiler does. Meet you in the next lecture. Thank you.